It's strange how you can feel the exact moment your life cleaves in two. For me, it wasn't when he packed his things or when he stopped coming home at night. It wasn't even when I noticed the slight hesitation in his kiss goodbye that final morning, as if he was already rehearsing his departure. It was when I sat at my kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg I'd been meaning to fix, bills spread before me like tarot cards foretelling my future. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, casting stripes across papers that bore my signature, but not my knowledge. My daughter Maya stood behind me, her hand resting on my shoulder, steady and warm. I could feel her pulse through her fingertips, or maybe it was my own heartbeat echoing backward. She read the text message aloud, her voice cracking just once. "Sorry you had to find out this way. It's all in your name now. I'm done." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply sat there, feeling the weight of those words settle into my bones like an old familiar ache. The clock on the microwave blinked 4:37, a moment forever crystallized. This wasn't heartbreak. I've had my heart broken before, jagged edges that eventually smooth with time. The kind that leaves you sobbing in grocery store aisles when a certain song plays, but eventually heals into a tender scar you can touch without wincing. No, this was betrayal, tucked neatly between sweet nothings and promises of forever. This was cold calculation disguised as affection, every "I love you" now retroactively transformed into strategic positioning. The worst part wasn't that he left. It was that he'd been planning his exit all along, crafting it meticulously while I made him coffee in the mornings and washed his shirts on Sundays. While I listened to his business calls with admiration. While I believed in his dreams more than I'd ever allowed myself to believe in my own. The apartment felt different that night, hollower somehow, as if the walls themselves had contracted around us. The streetlight outside cast long shadows across the linoleum floor, illuminating the stack of unpaid bills by the sink. I noticed how the space felt both emptier and more confining without him. His absence was its own presence, heavy, demanding acknowledgement. The television remained off. Neither of us could bear the forced cheerfulness of sitcom laughter. Instead, the refrigerator hummed its monotonous comfort, a sound that had faded into background noise until now, when it became almost deafening in our silence.
Tire-t-il tous en dollars?
Numbers that once seemed abstract now carried the weight of years. Years I would spend working extra shifts. Years Maya would spend watching me grow older before my time. Years we would never get back. Each dollar represented minutes stolen from us, minutes that would become hours, then days, then months of labor to repay what I never spent. I traced my finger along the edge of a credit card statement, paper cutting my skin just enough to feel the sting. How easily trust bleeds. The small bead of blood welling up seemed an appropriate metaphor for what had happened. Slow, subtle damage that nonetheless leaves a mark. The faucet dripped steadily into the sink. 1, 2, 3, measuring out the seconds of this new reality. Maya made tea neither of us would drink and sat across from me, her eyes reflecting a wisdom no 17-year-old should possess. The chamomile scent rose between us, familiar and ordinary, a strange counterpoint to the extraordinary collapse of our lives. She curled her fingers around the mug, absorbing its warmth, and I wondered when my child had learned to comfort herself through crisis. Had she been watching me all these years, studying my quiet endurance? We didn't speak much that night. Some silences need to be honored. Some wounds need the dignity of acknowledgement without the intrusion of platitudes. Looking back now, I realize I had spent my entire life preparing for disappointment without knowing it. My childhood taught me early, expect little, be grateful for crumbs, learn to find sustenance in scarcity. As a single mother raising Maya, I had become an expert at stretching dollars until they nearly tore, stretching time until minutes broke into usable fragments, stretching smiles across tired faces when there was nothing to smile about. I developed routines that disguised poverty as preference, telling Maya we were having breakfast for dinner because it was fun, not because eggs were cheaper than meat. Pretending I preferred to shop at thrift stores because I cared about the environment, not because new clothes would mean no electricity. Small deceptions born of love, of the fierce desire to protect her from the knowledge of our precarity. I worked nights at the pharmacy, counting out other people's healing while swallowing my own exhaustion. The fluorescent lights cast everyone in the same sickly pallor, making even the healthy look ill, making the ill look ghostly. I memorized the shapes and colors of medications, little white ovals for pain, blue circles for sleep, yellow rectangles for hearts that needed studying. I handed them across the counter with smiles that grew thinner as the night progressed, my feet aching in shoes I couldn't afford to replace. During days, I took on freelance administrative work, typing away in the quiet hours while Maya was at school, organizing other people's calendars while my own life remained a careful tightrope walk above financial ruin. It wasn't about getting ahead, it was about not falling behind, about maintaining that precious, fragile state called making do. Each month when I paid our rent, never late, not once in 12 years, I felt a small victory. Each time I managed to buy Maya new shoes instead of secondhand ones, I counted it a success. When the electric bill came in lower than expected, I allowed myself the luxury of turning the heat up 2 degrees. Small triumphs that only I witnessed, domestic victories unmarked by certificates or ceremonies. That's the thing about quiet perseverance. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't even expect recognition. It simply continues, day after day, finding dignity in the mere act of surviving another sunrise with integrity intact. When Greg appeared in my life, he arrived like some long-awaited answer to a question I'd forgotten I'd asked. On an ordinary Tuesday evening, between counting out Mrs. Abernathy's blood pressure medication and Mr. Wilson's cholesterol pills, I looked up to see him standing at the pharmacy counter. Even now, I remember the blue of his shirt, cornflower, like a summer sky, and how it stood out against the sterile white of the pharmacy. He came in for a simple prescription, but stayed to talk, charming the fluorescent lights into feeling warmer somehow. His laugh had a way of bouncing off linoleum and making it sound like wind chimes. He returned the next day, and the next, each time with small excuses that grew increasingly transparent. A forgotten refill. A question about supplements. Eventually, coffee at the diner across the street, where he traced the rim of his cup while telling me about the startup he was building. He had a way of speaking that made even the mundane sound like poetry, his business ventures, his dreams, his plans for the future. When he described market projections, they sounded like constellations being mapped. When he talked about supply chains, they transformed into rivers flowing toward prosperity. And when he spoke about potential, his eyes reflected something I hadn't seen in my own mirror for years. Possibility. Those plans increasingly included me, not just as an audience to his ambitions, but as a participant, a partner. "You're practical," he'd say, as if it were the highest compliment. "You're grounded. You understand the value of patience." He called me his rock, his foundation. I didn't realize then that foundations are things people build upon, things people stand on. I was so flattered by his attention that I missed the warning in his praise. He wasn't admiring my stability. He was assessing its usefulness. 3 months in, as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset paint the city gold, he asked to use my credit for what he called a short-term business loan. His fingers intertwined with mine, thumb brushing over my knuckles in gentle circles as he explained. "Just until the next quarter," he said. "The interest rates were better for people with established credit histories like mine," he explained. His company was on the verge of a breakthrough, and this small boost would tip it into success. The way he described it, us against the world, building something together, made me feel like more than a single mother working double shifts. It made me feel chosen. It made sense at the time, or perhaps I wanted it to make sense. I knew about trust and caution and red flags. I'd warned Maya about these very things as she entered her teenage years. But knowledge and wisdom exist in different realms, and sometimes the heart finds elaborate ways to justify what it wants. I signed my name on dotted lines without reading the fine print, not because I was stupid, but because I was tired of being alone. Tired of being the one who always said no. Tired of caution and budgets and the endless arithmetic of survival. For once, I wanted to say yes to possibility. Yes to someone seeing me as more than a mother, more than a provider. Yes to the small, persistent dream that life might still surprise me with joy instead of hardship. I never told Maya about the loans, about the credit cards opened in my name. Some secrets are meant to protect, not deceive. I compartmentalized my life into before and after Greg segments, keeping her safely in the overlap where nothing had to change. I protected her from adult concerns the way I always had, the way my own mother never did for me. I remembered too well what it felt like to lie awake at night as a child, listening to my mother cry over bills at the kitchen table. The helplessness of knowing adults around you are drowning and being too small to throw a lifeline. That knowledge doesn't make you stronger. It only teaches you to fear water. I continued our traditions as if nothing had changed. Movie nights with homemade popcorn that I'd shake in an old pot with a lid that never quite sealed right, sending kernels flying across the kitchen and making Maya laugh. Weekend trips to the public library, where she would lose herself in science fiction worlds while I browsed through cookbooks, pretending I had time to make elaborate meals instead of the quick, economical dishes that were our staples. I never missed her braces adjustment appointments despite the cost, scheduling them during my lunch breaks so I could drive her there myself, watching in the mirror as she tested her new smile on the ride home, metal catching sunlight like some industrial sunrise. When her school announced the annual science trip to the aquarium 3 hours away, I picked up extra shifts to ensure she could go. I still have the photo from that trip. Maya standing before an enormous tank of jellyfish, their translucent bodies pulsing with otherworldly light, her face reflecting the same wonder. When her laptop finally died with a sad electronic sigh in the middle of a term paper, I found a decent refurbished one online, spending hours comparing specs and prices, reading reviews until my eyes burned, just to make sure I was getting her the most memory and processing speed our limited budget could afford. It arrived in a plain brown box instead of shiny packaging, but she hugged me as if I'd given her the moon. It was never about giving her everything. It was about making sure she never felt the weight of having nothing. About creating a childhood where scarcity might exist, but didn't define her understanding of what was possible. I wanted her to grow up believing she deserved good things, unlike me, who had spent decades convincing myself I could make do with less, that wanting more was somehow greedy or unrealistic. All those nights, while Greg spoke of investments and returns, of market projections and scaling operations, I quietly maintained our life, paying bills before their due dates, fixing what broke with YouTube tutorials and stubborn determination, keeping us afloat in the space between his grand promises and our modest reality. I became expert at straddling these worlds, nodding with appropriate enthusiasm when he showed me sleek brochures for potential office spaces, then later that same night calculating to the penny how much of Maya's babysitting money she could keep for herself versus how much needed to go into her college fund. I learned to believe in his future, with one part of my heart, while anchoring us firmly in our present with the rest. The calls began 3 days after his text. 3 days of stunned silence, of moving through our apartment touching objects as if to confirm they were real, of sleeping in fits and starts, waking with that momentary amnesia that allows you to forget disaster until consciousness floods back fully. Then the phones began to ring. First from numbers I didn't recognize, Arizona, New Jersey, Minnesota. Then from numbers with our area code, which felt like betrayal of a different sort, as if neighbors were calling to collect. Then from numbers that seemed to multiply like cells dividing, appearing on my phone screen at all hours, during my shifts, during dinner, during the sacred, quiet moments before sleep could claim me. I answered at first, hope, a terrible anchor dragging me toward disappointment. Perhaps there had been some mistake, some misunderstanding that words could resolve. Perhaps Greg would be on the other end with explanations that would transform this nightmare back into the dream I'd been living. But the voices belonged to strangers, professionally detached, with the practiced cadence of people reading from scripts designed to extract payment without acknowledging humanity. Their words had the hollow echo of corporate caverns, terms like jointly liable and contractual obligation, bouncing off the walls of my comprehension without finding purchase in reality. They spoke of accounts I'd never accessed, a platinum business credit card with a $20,000 limit maxed out on purchases in Miami, Phoenix, Las Vegas. Places I'd never been. They detailed purchases I'd never authorized, first-class flights, luxury hotel suites, electronics bought in bulk. One particularly persistent caller referred to a business card linked to something called Next Level Enterprises, a company I'd never heard of until that moment, though apparently I was its co-founder and chief financial officer according to the paperwork. My signature appeared on documents I'd never seen, for transactions I couldn't have approved because I'd been administering flu shots to elderly patients or helping Maya with trigonometry homework when they occurred. My protests grew increasingly desperate. That's not my signature, I insisted, though even to my ears the words sounded thin, insubstantial against the weight of their evidence. I never authorized these charges. I've never even been to Miami. When I explained that I hadn't opened these accounts, that my signature must have been forged, the silence on the other end spoke volumes, a pause just long enough to communicate disbelief without having to voice it. They'd heard this story before, from women just like me. To them, I was just another naive, middle-aged woman making excuses for financial irresponsibility, blaming an ex for decisions I must have been complicit in. Their voices would soften into practiced sympathy that thinly veiled their skepticism. I understand this is difficult, Ms. Harrison, but these obligations remain your responsibility regardless of your relationship status. After the fifth such call, I stopped answering numbers I didn't recognize. Instead, I created a spreadsheet, names of creditors, account numbers, amounts owed, minimum payments required. The organization gave me an illusion of control, though the totals at the bottom of each column told a different story.
$12,000.
The cost of my trust, quantified in monthly installments I couldn't possibly afford. The weight of those debts pressed down like gravity intensified, like walking through water, like breathing through wool. Each movement required more energy than before, each decision more calculation. Letters arrived in official-looking envelopes, each one thicker than the last, their windows revealing just enough of my name to make my stomach clench as I collected the mail. I began to recognize the different paper stocks, the cream-colored heaviness of legal notices, the thin white efficiency of payment demands, the textured importance of court summons. I would open them at the kitchen table after Maya went to bed, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across terms like collection proceedings and wage garnishment that crawled from the pages into my nightmares. I developed rituals to contain my fear, deep breaths before opening envelopes, a glass of water nearby to combat the dryness in my throat, a notepad to record each new figure, each new deadline. These small ceremonies created artificial borders around my panic, keeping it from seeping into every moment of my day. Still, I would find myself staring at nothing while waiting for prescriptions to process, my mind calculating interest rates and minimum payments instead of checking dosages. The first time my paycheck came up short, I stared at the numbers in disbelief, though I'd been warned it was coming. My supervisor handed me the slip with an awkward pat on my shoulder, her eyes sliding away from mine. "It's the garnishment," she said, as if I might not understand why 20% of my earnings had vanished. As if I might have forgotten the letters, the calls, the court date I couldn't attend because missing a shift would have meant no paycheck at all. That missing 20% meant rice for dinner again, bland and filling, a canvas I would try to paint with different spices to pretend it was choice rather than necessity. It meant telling Maya that maybe next semester she could take that art class she wanted, watching her face maintain careful neutrality as she said, "It's okay, Mom. I can practice on my own." It meant calculating to the penny how much gas I needed to get to and from work until the next payday, planning routes that avoided hills to conserve fuel, declining lunch invitations because even $5 for a sandwich was $5 we didn't have. But worse than the financial strain was the shame. The hot flush that crept up my neck when I had to ask for an advance on my next check. The way I avoided eye contact in the break room, afraid to see pity or judgment reflected back at me. The sideways glances from coworkers who must have gossiped about my garnished wages, their whispers just loud enough to catch fragments. That boyfriend, and should have known better, and all that debt. The sudden cancellation of plans from friends who'd heard through the grapevine about my situation, their excuses as transparent as they were merciful, sparing us both the awkwardness of my having to decline invitations I couldn't afford to accept. The way the pharmacist now checked my drawer with extra scrutiny at the end of each shift, his fingers counting bills with exaggerated care, as if financial desperation might make me steal, as if poverty were contagious or criminal or both. I began parking farther from the store entrances, walking the extra distance to avoid running into anyone who might ask how I was doing. I perfected the art of the brief, bright smile that discouraged further inquiry. I mastered the casual deflection. "Oh, you know how it is, just busy." That satisfied social obligation without inviting conversation. I became adept at invisibility, at taking up less space, at making my struggles small enough to hide behind politeness. And all the while, I kept working, kept putting one foot in front of the other, kept breathing through the weight of shame that threatened to press all air from my lungs. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, no shouting matches or door slamming, no cinematic moment of catharsis or collapse. Just a quiet Tuesday afternoon with overcast skies threatening rain that never quite fell, mirroring the constant state of suspended dread I'd been living in. I pushed my cart through the grocery store, calculating as I went, putting back the name brand cereal for the store brand, bypassing fresh berries for the frozen ones on sale, choosing the slightly bruised apples from the reduced rack. I had exactly $47.16 to spend on food that needed to last until payday, a puzzle I'd grown expert at solving. At the checkout, I arranged items on the conveyor belt in precise order, essentials first, in case I needed to put something back. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant electrical hum that seemed to match the anxiety vibrating beneath my skin. The cashier, a boy not much older than Maya, with acne across his cheeks and a name tag that read Justin, scanned my carefully chosen items with the bored efficiency of youth. When he announced the total, $42.37, I felt that small victory of coming in under budget, a moment's reprieve from constant financial vigilance. I swiped my card and waited for the machine to chirp its approval. Instead, it emitted a harsh beep that seemed to echo through the store. Justin frowned at the screen, then swiped my card himself. Another beep, louder this time. Or perhaps it just seemed louder as I became aware of the line forming behind me, a woman with a toddler in her cart, an elderly man leaning on his cane, a businessman checking his watch with pointed impatience. "I'll try again," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. The third beep felt like public indictment. Justin called for a manager as the line behind me grew, customers shifting their weight from foot to foot, exchanging glances that managed to combine sympathy and irritation in equal measure. The manager, a woman with dyed blonde hair pulled back too tightly and a permanently furrowed brow, appeared beside Justin. She looked at the screen, then at me, her expression carefully blank. "Nam, your account has been flagged," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, her voice lowered in what might have been an attempt at discretion but only served to highlight my humiliation. "There appears to be a security hold. You'll need to contact your bank." I felt heat creep up my neck, spreading across my face in what must have been a visible flush of shame. My fingers fumbled with my wallet as I searched for another card, though I knew there wasn't one that would work. "I don't understand," I said, the words sticking in my suddenly dry throat. "I just deposited my paycheck yesterday." The manager offered a tight smile that conveyed no warmth, only the practiced patience of someone who had witnessed this scene before, with different actors but the same script. I later learned that Greg had somehow linked one of his business accounts to my checking account, and suspicious transactions, purchases in cities I'd never visited, withdrawals at times I'd been at work, had triggered a security freeze. But in that moment, standing under the harsh fluorescent lights with my groceries half-bagged and everyone watching, all I knew was the particular humiliation of public financial failure. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to, the cashier, the people waiting, or myself. I left my half-filled cart in the aisle and walked out, past the curious stares and impatient sighs, past the automatic doors that slid open with an indifferent whoosh, admitting me back into the gray afternoon. In the car, I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, its leather cool against my flushed skin, and allowed myself exactly 3 minutes of despair. 180 seconds to feel sorry for myself. To feel the full weight of rage and helplessness and shame. to wonder how I could have been so blind, so trusting, so eager to believe in possibilities that I ignored probabilities. I counted those seconds with brutal precision, watching the digital clock on the dashboard. When the 3 minutes ended, I straightened up, used an old napkin from the glove compartment to dry my eyes, and started the car. I drove to the bank, where I spent 2 hours sitting in an uncomfortable chair across from a personal banker named Melissa, sorting through the wreckage of my financial life. Melissa had kind eyes but a professional demeanor that maintained just enough distance to preserve my dignity. She printed statements, highlighted transactions, made phone calls on my behalf, her French manicured nails tapping efficiently on her keyboard as she documented everything. By the time we finished, I had a folder full of forms to dispute charges, a temporary access code for my now unfrozen account, and a clearer understanding of just how thoroughly Greg had entangled his finances with mine. When I picked Maya up from her after-school program, the sunlight had taken on that golden quality of late afternoon, softening edges and creating halos around ordinary things. She was sitting on a bench outside the community center, sketchbook open on her lap, pencil moving in swift, sure strokes across the page. She looked up as I approached, and I wondered when her face had lost its childish roundness, when her eyes had gained that perceptiveness that seemed to see right through my attempt at normalcy. She took one look at me, at whatever remained in my expression despite my best efforts to smooth it away, and closed her sketchbook without a word. In the car, she didn't ask about the groceries I'd failed to bring home. Instead, she said, "Is it okay if we just have peanut butter sandwiches for dinner? I'm not really hungry for anything else." Her voice was casual, deliberately light, offering me the gift of pretending this was her preference rather than our necessity. She knew. Children always know, no matter how hard we try to shield them. They feel the currents of adult distress like changes in barometric pressure, invisible but undine. I considered bankruptcy. The word itself tasted bitter on my tongue, like admitting defeat. I sat in my car during lunch breaks, searching terms like Chapter 7 and credit score recovery on my phone. I calculated how long it would take to pay off $30,000 on a pharmacy technician's salary. The math was unforgiving. But each time I nearly convinced myself to call the bankruptcy attorney whose number I'd saved, something stopped me. Pride, perhaps. Or the memory of my own mother, who'd raised me with the mantra that you clean up your own messes, even when someone else made them. So instead of declaring bankruptcy, I declared war on those numbers. I picked up weekend home health aid shifts. I started transcribing medical notes in the quiet hours after Maya went to bed. I sold clothing I no longer wore, and furniture we could do without. Not all at once, but piece by piece, I chipped away at that mountain of debt. It wasn't dramatic or inspiring. It was just what needed to be done. 6 months after Greg disappeared, a notification appeared on Maya's phone as we ate dinner. "Look," she said, turning the screen toward me. There he was, tan and smiling on a Miami beach, arm wrapped around a woman whose face glowed with the same trust I'd once worn. His Instagram page now showed a different name, Greg Wallace instead of Greg Mitchell, but the same charismatic smile remained. His caption read, "Finally debt-free and living my best life. #blessed, #no regrets." The urge to contact him surged through me like electricity, to call, to scream, to demand explanations or apologies or anything that might make sense of what he'd done. My fingers actually trembled with the need to reach for my phone. But Maya watched me, her expression unreadable, and something inside me stilled. What would words accomplish now? Instead, I stood up and packed tomorrow's lunch for Maya. Turkey sandwich, apple, granola bar. I confirmed my overnight shift at the pharmacy. I let silence do what rage never could, preserve my dignity. The email arrived on a Sunday morning, subject line, "Catching up, business opportunity." I recognized the sender's name from conversations Greg had had on speakerphone in our apartment. His new business partner. "Hey Leah, Greg mentioned you might have some old invoices or books we could clean up together. He says you're great with spreadsheets and might be able to help us get organized. Willing to pay standard bookkeeping rates." The audacity stole my breath. After everything, he was still trying to use me, still assuming I would be available to clean up his messes. I closed my laptop without responding, too tired even for anger. That night, as I folded laundry and calculated how many more double shifts I would need to make the minimum payments this month, a soft knock came at my bedroom door. Maya stood in the doorway, a strange mixture of nervousness and determination on her face. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, her voice steady despite her fidgeting hands. "I took care of it." Those 5 words sent ice through my veins. Took care of what?
How?
The scenarios that flashed through my mind ranged from concerning to terrifying. Had she confronted Greg somehow? Done something illegal? But as she sat beside me and opened her laptop, a different story unfolded. For months, while I worked extra shifts, Maya had been building something of her own. A digital art store selling prints and merchandise featuring her AI-generated designs, galaxies and dreamscapes that shimmered with otherworldly beauty. She showed me the accounts, the sales reports, the growing customer base. She had saved nearly $15,000, half of our debt, and had been making payments directly to the creditors. But that wasn't all. She had also found Greg's old electronics in our storage closet, tablets and hard drives he'd forgotten in his hasty departure, and sold them through online marketplaces. And most surprisingly, she had discovered paperwork hidden in one of those devices, paperwork that linked Greg to what appeared to be a pattern of identity theft. My daughter, my quiet, studious daughter, who I thought spent her evenings doing homework, had been systematically dismantling the financial prison Greg had built around us. She had even anonymously reported one of his shell companies to the State Business Authority. As she explained all this, her words tumbled out faster and faster, as if she feared my disapproval. But how could I disapprove of such fierce protection? I sat there, stunned into silence, my laundry-creased hands suddenly still in my lap. When had she grown so capable? While I had been working to keep us afloat, she had been working to set us free. The roles we had played for so long, protector and protected, had somehow shifted without my noticing. I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling her heart beat against mine. My brilliant, resourceful daughter. My unexpected salvation. 1 month later, we received a call from a woman named Claire Donovan, who introduced herself as an attorney specializing in financial fraud. She had been contacted by the business authority regarding Greg's company filings and had recognized his methods immediately. 3 years earlier, she explained, Greg had done the same thing to her before she became a lawyer. She had never been able to prove it sufficiently for criminal charges, but she had documented everything meticulously. When Maya's anonymous report landed on her desk, containing evidence that matched her own experience so precisely, she knew she had found another victim of the same scheme. Together, we compiled everything: the forged signatures, the unauthorized accounts, the shell companies, the pattern of calculated financial abuse. We forwarded it all to the appropriate authorities, not with vengeance in our hearts, but with the quiet resolve of women reclaiming their stories. The system works slowly, grinding like old gears, but it does eventually move. Greg wasn't arrested. The burden of proof for financial crimes remains frustratingly high, but his accounts were frozen pending investigation. His new business collapsed under scrutiny, investors pulling out as rumors of fraud circulated. A small article appeared in the local business journal, "Serial Entrepreneur Under Fire for Financial Misconduct." No mugshot, no dramatic perp walk, just 3 paragraphs detailing the investigation into his business practices. I didn't share the article on social media. I didn't email it to mutual friends or family members. I simply printed it out and placed it in a folder labeled "Closure," then tucked it away in my desk drawer. Some victories don't need witnesses. That was a year ago. Today, Maya and I sit at a new kitchen table in a new apartment. Nothing fancy, but the table doesn't wobble and the windows let in more light. The debt is gone, paid off through a combination of Maya's online business success, my steady work, and a small settlement from the class action suit Claire eventually filed against Greg's largest shell company. Maya's digital art shop has grown beyond anyone's expectations, enough that she set aside money for college next year. I work just one job now, day shifts at a hospital pharmacy that allow me to be home for dinner. On our refrigerator hangs a simple yellow sticky note Maya wrote during our hardest month. He left us worse off, so we made ourselves better. Sometimes when I'm making coffee in the morning, I pause to read those words, feeling their truth settle into the peaceful corners of our rebuilt life. The sound of pencil on paper draws my attention back to the present moment. Maya sits across from me, sketching something new for her collection, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sunlight catches in her hair, illuminating strands of copper I'd never noticed before. I sip my tea, watching her create worlds from blank space. There's a lesson in that, I think, about starting over, about making something from nothing, about the quiet power of beginning again. Not everyone who saves you is older, with more life experience or worldly wisdom. Sometimes strength skips a generation, manifesting in unexpected ways. Sometimes your child becomes your teacher, showing you how resilience can look different than you imagined. And sometimes that's exactly enough. More than enough. Everything